Indonesia's Lion Air has resumed domestic flights after the government eased some travel rules. It's part of efforts to kickstart the country's economy. Lion Air grounded its fleet just a week ago, arguing the government's COVID-19 regulations made it hard for people to travel. But it's reversed that decision after the rules were simplified. Airlines are now able to carry more passengers than previously allowed. Aviation industry losses are soaring to unprecedented levels globally. The International Air Transport Association expects them to hit $84 billion this year. It's effectively the biggest profit plunge in aviation history.
We are not authorized to fly or to cross borders or to bring international passengers, so that our raison d'être, the reason why we are working, has disappeared for weeks, for months. So it explains why we are in such a difficult and tragic situation.
Losses are set to continue and could hit $100 billion in 2021. Many carriers have been trying to stay afloat with government aid, the latest being Cathay Pacific, which will receive $5 billion from the Hong Kong government. Now, for more on this story, we're joined by Brendan Sobie. He is an independent analyst and a consultant for Sobie Aviation. So firstly, Indonesia is joining the ranks of countries like India and China in opening up the domestic aviation sector again. Is the appetite for travel growing after the initial fears from the pandemic?
It's very slow in recovering in most markets, and Indonesia is no exception. Indonesia is a bit unusual in that they stopped flying later than a lot of the other countries like India or the Philippines. This was back in late April, but they only stopped briefly, and then they reopened the market early, and then Lion after that decided to shut down again for a second time because there were so many restrictions in place, and some of the restrictions have eased, but not all of them. The appetite for demand for domestic air travel in Indonesia is still significantly down, as it is in most of the other countries where the domestic market has recovered. I would say China and Vietnam are probably where we're seeing the most demand, and also somewhat in South Korea as well. Those markets are recovered or are recovering faster than some of the other domestic markets, where they're more starting just in the recent weeks, I would say, in terms of starting that crawl back. And it could be a very slow recovery in many cases. Even for a domestic market, could take several months to recover. International will take years, of course, to recover, which is very dismal for somebody like Singapore Airlines or Cathay because they don't have a domestic market.
So, Brandon, what would you say is key to the aviation sector recovering then?
There's a lot of key things that need to happen. I think right now a lot of the focus is on harmonization of standards, uniform standards. So Indonesia is an example where they've gone flip-flopped a few times in terms of their standards, and even now they're not really conforming to what IATA and ICAO are recommending. So every domestic market, even just in Asia Pacific, the standards are different, and this has to stop because it's confusing the passengers, sending kind of a mixed signal, and it's also very hard for airlines to manage these different standards in different countries. Now with mainly a domestic market, it's somewhat manageable, but still confusing and difficult, especially when there's a lot of changes every week, like we've seen in Indonesia. But most importantly, for the international market to restart, and some international markets are resuming as early as this month or next month, particularly in Europe. Not so much here in Asia yet, but it will come eventually. These standards need to be, uniformed, harmonized and made uniform. And a lot of the push is to do that. And hopefully governments will kind of be on the same page across the world, fairly soon. Otherwise, it's difficult to restart this market. And of course, consumer demand has to return as well. And that's about confidence in traveling and making and having the confidence that travel is safe, of course. And I think the standards, if there's uniform standards, that also becomes a little easier. But a lot of communication needs to be done by airlines. A lot of it has been done, but even more has to be done. And people just have to start flying again. Once they fly once and realize it's a safe mode of travel, even in a pandemic environment, then hopefully they'll travel again, and they'll travel further and internationally in the months ahead.
And Brendan, IATA forecasts losses to hit more than $84 billion this year. That is a large, significant amount of money. Huge carriers are already receiving state funding to help them. What's the outlook, though, for smaller and budget carriers moving forward? And what does that mean for the way we might be traveling?
Yeah, I mean, so for budget airlines, it really depends. A lot of the budget airlines, particularly here in Asia, are owned by the major full-service airlines. So like Scoot under SIA, CityLink under Garuda, Hong Kong Express under Cathay. So they're kind of protected by these bailouts and these financial relief packages that their parent airlines have received. But a lot of the independent low-cost airlines like Lion and AirAsia, VietJet, or Cebu Pacific are the main ones here in Asia. They haven't benefited from these packages, and they're going to have to bolster their liquidity privately in most cases because it looks like the government, it won't step in and provide much support. So some of them, also the smaller ones that I haven't mentioned, those are the ones that perhaps are, quite in a weak position right now, and consolidation is possible. In terms of, budget travel in the future, I think, there's still a lot of supply, especially in this region in Southeast Asia, where over half the market in terms of domestic and regional international travel is budget airlines. So they provide most of those seats, and they're going to want to get back in the air, and they're going to want to stimulate demand and try to persuade people and convince people that air travel is okay. So I think we're going to see, low fares, and we're still going to see a lot of budget airlines in this region. And the near term is kind of on getting the passenger back in the air so that, they can start generating revenues and get the confidence level back. But it's going to be a long fight. This is going to, especially for the international market, it's going to be a few years, and not all the airlines in this region are going to survive that long battle with their balance sheets. And it'll be interesting to see, what happens. It's not like an overnight thing. It's really a long battle. It's going to be a long-term thing to look at, and the outlook is relatively bleak. But even if a few airlines, don't make it, there's still plenty of airlines, especially in this region, and intense competition. So passengers will still have a lot of choices, and probably the fares will remain pretty low just based on the supply and demand situation.
Right, indeed. And in this instance, it is time will tell. But thank you so much for your analysis. Brendan Sobie there, analyst and consultant for Sobie Aviation.